Welcome back, Bee Shifters. John Vance here. Today, my cohorts, Nick Brunacini, Josh Blum, and myself will be speaking with Shane Ray. Shane is the president of the National Fire Sprinkler Association. He's also a former fire chief, firefighter, and he knows his fire protection system stuff. He's the foremost expert, I think, on the fire side to be able to break it down for us what we should be doing. And today specifically, we'll be talking about supporting the fire suppression systems in big box buildings. We've seen a lot of big box fires lately. We had our big box bulletin last week, and we thought, well, let's get Shane on and talk about the systems, because there's a lot of information going around right now about how we support the systems and even some misconceptions about some of the fires that have happened as of late. So we're very lucky to have Shane on the program here today with us. So without further ado, let's talk to Shane Ray. First of all, I want to start talking about big box fires, what you've seen out there lately. And I'm just not talking about current events, but over the last 10 years in the fires that we've been going to.
Yeah, it's a whole different world out there, from the configuration of the building to the commodities in that building. And Chief Brunacini said many, many times, we're going to burn this building down according to code. And so, as Nick said, most fire departments in America have a fire prevention bureau. And then again, those are the codes and standards we require these big box buildings to be built to. And of course, a big box, and I want to talk about that in a little bit, how it's changed over the years. But we've got to get where the fire protection system and the fire department operations meet one another and say, hey, it's going to take us both. We have to work together. We started a program back. I pulled the T-shirts out of the basement closet last week that said Partners in Progress. It had a picture of a firefighter and a picture of a fire sprinkler device. And it said, Partners in Progress. We have to work together in order to protect our communities, from homes to high rises. In these big box buildings, I took a picture of a high rise building downtown Nashville just last week. I said, if you laid this building down and took out all the floors, that's essentially what you have in many of your communities across the country. And it doesn't matter whether you're a metropolitan sized fire department or whether you're a small volunteer fire department out in the middle of nowhere, essentially. That's one of those things that when you have that, it's like this is in your community, because it's they're building these things around transportation centers. And that's where our fire departments meet these buildings.
I think we could probably differentiate too between a distribution center at some point in this and a Home Depot or a Walmart. I mean, those are, two different things. Seldom do you see a Walmart store that's, well, you're not going to see one that's 1 million square feet, but the distribution center. So I think those are a different animal too. So, I mean, people classify those as a big box, but they're truly two different things when you talk about conveyors and the system and all of that.
Yeah, you're right, Josh. And we do need to distinguish that, because the days of Home Depot and Lowe's and all of these others, what back in the days we used to all train to with big box fire attack and big box search, that's changed because these distribution centers create their own occupancy type. And we've tried to change that in the codes and standards that says a mercantile business that you go in and shop and buy things is much different than where you store things and you go in and purchase items. So, for example, and I was just doing some research on this, the word supermarket. So if you went back to the days of the 50s and 60s, coming from the 1920s, 30s, 40s, post-World War, a supermarket, which was like an ungodly large building in those days, was 10,000 square feet. So just to give you a perspective, a typical Walmart, Lowe's, Home Depot averages 100 to 180,000 square feet today. But these distribution centers and the fires, and I've been tracking these since 2015, which is when I hired into this position with the National Fire Sprinkler Association. And again, I still go to fires. I still get to go hang out with you guys and gals across the country, go to fires. Some while the fire's going on, many of them when the fire's already out and the after effect. But when you look at that difference in this shift, those new distribution centers are all over 1 million square feet. The other thing we got to talk about too in this is storage facilities. There's a difference between a warehousing and distribution center and a storage. So if you go back to the old banker boxes, right? And we just had one of those fires in Illinois that the outcome was bad because the racks collapsed. And when the racks collapsed, it pulled the in-rack sprinklers out. Well, nobody that I know of, and I've asked all of my friends around the research world, have we done testing with the weight of the boxes? And so some of the manufacturers and some of the owners that own these big buildings have conducted some of those tests. But after some of these distribution fires, I said, how much does a box of turtleneck sweaters weigh when it's soaking wet? And they're like, why in the hell would you ask that question? I'm like, well, because if that sprinkler system above all that product is flowing 2,000 gallons of water a minute, obviously there's no cardboard box going to stand up to that flow. So then how much does all the product weigh? Well, guess what? We don't know. And so that's the biggest news coming out of all these things that have been happening for years. It's not new.
So these are the engineers that design these systems don't factor this in, what the water does to the contents that they're protecting?
Not my role, Nick. I only engineer one part of this thing.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, that's a problem, right? Would you like to do some fire testing to see how long this thing's going to stand up? So that's what we're trying to do now is with our partners with UL Fire Safety Research Institute is to say, it's one thing to burn in the lab and test the rack or test the product or test the sprinkler or test these things, but we need to bring it all together because the guys and the gals in the street are meeting this system for the first time. And that's what I believe we all have a responsibility. And thank you, B Shifter, for starting the project here. We got a responsibility to get this word out that says, hello, the single family dwelling fire I go to in Pleasant View, Tennessee, where all the houses are sprinkled because they've been sprinkled since 2000, or Scottsdale, Arizona, that's been doing it for years. These places, the house is much different than the Walmart. We have a sprinkler save, we figure, because we track these sprinkler saves. I put out a spotlight on sprinklers every Friday that goes out that highlights our saves. And Minnesota is one of our king places that do that. They track all those. That fire in that single family dwelling is much different than what's in Walmart. But we believe we have a save, sprinkler save, in Walmart once a month because of how many stores there are. So in the store itself, where humans occupied and people go and shop, we know we save those like all the time. But when you go move that product to a different area, which is what happened in some of these distribution centers, you've essentially put 5 stores in one spot and 4 floors inside of one building. And as I said, when I left one of those fires, I'm like, there's no fire department in America ready to deal with this fire because you're 400 feet deep into a building that is 48 feet to now 80 feet tall. And it has racks and from the product getting packaged till the time it stops on a truck, there is one hell of a configuration inside that building that we're not sure how to operate within with zero visibility. But here's the thing I'll say, you have to be patient. The fire protection system, just like the fire department, the community has built up over the years and invested millions of dollars in. Well, this building was built and they invested millions of dollars in it to protect it. So they did that to protect it, to give you time to respond and get to it. But again, we have to know the difference between this is my house, this is a high rise, this is a strip mall, this is a 1 million square foot building that is open from one end to the other. There's no building. I said, give me 10 high rise fires versus one of these because there's compartmentalization in all those buildings. In here, none.
So the systems in those buildings, in those big like storage units, are those designed to control the fire and extinguish it? Or because that's the thing. It's like I was trained in a way where they said, listen, the sprinkler system is designed to control the fire for you guys to get there and do the final extinguishment. So that's kind of the sheet of music I was brought up on. It seems to me that these bigger buildings, especially now, they have some of the heads flow over 200, 250 gallons of water a minute. That's fire control level fire flows. So when we get to one of these buildings, the best action we can take then is to support like whatever water system, the standpipes, sprinkler valves, whatever. And because you said it earlier, we don't carry SCBAs that allow us to go 400 feet in a building, especially if there's no entrances, just one way in, one way out. You're going to run out of air doing it. And then you got to factor in, what's my life safety piece look like? I mean, so you said it, there's not people shopping in these. They're designed to store a bunch of highly combustible plastic shit that people will buy later on.
Everything that's in our house is in these buildings, right? And it's a lot of it because it has to supply millions of homes, not just a few, right? We're not just going to shop for ourselves. But to your point, Nick, is that there is a difference between control mode sprinklers and suppression sprinklers. That's all happened in our careers. That has evolved during the time that we've been in this business. That says beforehand it was, hey, I'm going to give you time to get there, give you time to assemble your things, give Mrs. Smith the time to exit, and give you time to get in, right? Well, that's changed. These big buildings says, hey, we got to keep the fire to this area, right? That's always been a design criteria. But in these big buildings, though, that whole system has two, like in most of these fires that's happened over the last 5 years, there's 2 fire pumps generally in those buildings. They have their own individual water supply, and most of those fire pumps are 2,500 gallon a minute fire pump. You have an electric fire pump and you have a diesel backup pump. And so that's what we got to go support. When you pull up, hook up, just help the system, right? The recent fire that we've had in one of the facilities that is a mercantile facility where you go shop and things are stored. You have to treat, and we've been working with our friend Homer Robertson in Fort Worth, Texas. It's like, you got to treat that rack storage area where you go in the store and pick out your own product, but there's stuff stored 20 feet above your head. You have to treat that as a firefighter as that's its own building, because don't get into between those 2 racks, right? Because at some point, they have a lot of weight. With a lot of weight and a lot of water, something's going to fall. So we've never heard, I've never been in a training class in all my days that said, hey, go treat this rack like it's a building itself, right? Stay on the corners, don't get in the aisles, don't get close. Well, that's a whole nother ballgame, but we have to support that system and let it operate. The other piece we got to realize is those 2 2,500 gallon a minute pumps. And to your point, Nick, is like, that ESFR head, which is an early suppression, fast response. It took home sprinkler technology that says, I got to go off fast. I got to activate early in order to save Mrs. Smith's life. Well, we took that and put it in these gigantic buildings and said, we need this to go off quickly and keep that fire in the area where it is. Well, that gets that going. Well, that system, like in some of these big buildings, there could be a bank of 8 sprinkler risers. Most buildings we go in have 1 sprinkler riser, right? This has a bank of 8 sprinkler risers in one spot. In one of those 1 million square foot buildings could have 40 to 60 of these banks of risers. That bank of risers that would be designed, one of the pipes going up, if you could imagine, 6 or 8 inch pipe going up to the ceiling level, 50 feet above, and going out to the lines where the sprinklers are. That thing could be designed for 12, 14, 15 sprinklers to activate at 2,500 gallons of water a minute. So that thing is flowing a lot of water. And then you mix those systems. You have one system that's for the sprinklers at the ceiling level. And then you have another system that's for the sprinklers that cover mezzanine levels and office space and these other areas of the building. We have to support those because they're in there working and trying to keep that fire to the area of origin. And we just had a conversation the other day that says, when you pull up on one of these 1 million square foot buildings, you have to go isolate off that fire area and say, we're not dealing with the whole building. We're only dealing with this one area. Now let's watch the fire pump. Let's make sure that there's not too many heads opening, because just like a pumper, I described it the other day. I'm like, here's how this happened. I'll put it in Shane Ray simple terms, because that's all I understand. If we pulled up on a house fire, pulled 2 pre-connects off and attacked the fire and got it brought under control, command says the fire's under control, we go out to rehab. Well, while we're in rehab, though, if you don't have water still flowing in these big buildings, it's like somebody, while we was at rehab, pulled 25 hand lines off that pumper and said, okay, now we're going to open all 25 hand lines up. That pumper is going to go, I can't deal with this, guys. You've pulled too many lines and are trying to flow more water than I have coming in and more water than I can put out. So that's where we have to get the message out that says, look, support the system. Do not mess with it. It is working and functional. That's why we do testing. That's why we do maintenance. That's why we do inspections. And those things are what our operational people need to be more involved in, because it is truly their front line of defense.
We did a recent poll on B-Shifter, and I'm interested in your experience on this, but our question was, at a commercial fire, what company hooks up to the FDC and pumps it in your system? 27% said first due, 51% said second due, 10% said third due, and 12% said it's at the IC's discretion. So what do you think, Shane, is the best practice for us on that?
The companies that are responding, it's definitely should be the first or second due. The first pumper or the second pumper needs to get that fire department connection. The company that arrives needs to get that fire department connection supported as quick as they can. Because if the first due, depending on the size of the building, if the first due goes to the alarm panels or the fire control center in some of these big buildings, same as you would on a high rise, if they go there and determine where it is, then the second due needs to come in and hook up. The other piece too you got to be considerate of is, are you hooking up to a yard hydrant or are you looking up to a municipal hydrant? So there's 2 different things, right? If you got this 2 million square feet building sitting here, it's got its own tank and pump. So it's got its own water supply. So when you, in some of these recent fires, 2 buildings side by side one another, they have to be far enough apart, right, to get all these trucks. So you have no exposure problem on these buildings, right? Because they're gigantic parking lots totally surrounding them to get product in and out. But in between those buildings, there's 2 150,000 gallon tanks. And there's a building built between those 2 gigantic tanks. And that's where the fire pumps are located. And in the middle of those, typically, they're not all the same, but typically is the electrical room. There's an electric fire pump on one side and a diesel fire pump on the other side. That system in almost all of these buildings are designed to run 60, 90, or 120 minutes. So you got an hour and a half, or 2 hours worth of built-in fire protection. Now, if you close any of those valves, the only way you're going to get water to it is you pump the connection. And so we've seen recent fires over the last couple of years, one where a firefighter lost his life and the fire department did not pump the connection. It's like, that's your way to get water in the building right off the bat. But you have to let those systems work. But if they don't work, you need to pump it. And that's why the first due, if they know where the fire is and they don't need to tackle that task, then they should hook up. If they don't, they go figure out where the fire is. The second due can come in and support that system. And you have to know your buildings. And those are a place where the two things that we're trying to get out now is what NFPA 1620 versus NFPA 13E. NFPA 13E is fighting fire in buildings with sprinklers. It's a whole recommended practice in and of itself that goes with the NFPA 13 family of standards. So we need everybody to consult those documents a long way around to answer your question with, you need to go look at those, you need to pre-plan, and you need to build a system of operations that says somebody has to go support this system. And the earlier we can support it, the better off we are.
One of the things, I don't know, I've heard within the last 5 or 6 years is people talking about high-rise buildings and prioritizing initial tasks that you assign. And it seems that pumping the system has fallen lower on that list because it's a high-rise building and there's people in it. And so the first company will go to the fire control room. The next companies go to the stairwells. For whatever reason, the high-rise heads came out and said, we got too much other high-value work we got to do to pump the system. That seems to me to ignore all the built-in stuff that is actually putting water on the fire. It's almost like we have this need for support work ahead of fire control work still that's driving our tactical choice, especially in bigger buildings that are sprinkled.
Yeah, exactly. We have to change that mentality to say, number one, let's take the path that gets water on the fire fastest. We studied that. We burned a lot of buildings while I was in South Carolina for research at South Carolina Fire Academy to say, if a firefighter's calling a mayday, put water on it, right? Because we want to stop that thermal insult. So we've done a great job of getting the word out that says, hey, we wouldn't want to spray water with firefighters in there because it'll, quote, steam them. Well, if they're yelling mayday because they're burning up, they're thankful for steam, right? It's like, hey, that converts at a lower temperature and expands greater to stop this heat. Well, we got to do the same thing with this system. So I'll give you an example. We've been burning here at Eastern Kentucky University doing some fire testing in the field. The first time ever in our organization's 117-year history that we're doing fire research in the field, in the street with firefighters, not in a laboratory. And so when we do that, though, we go lay out all these hoses, right? We get the buildings prepped just like we want it. We get everything out there. And then the fire department sends us an engine company. We've never had a single engine pull up on our test burns and say, guys, we're going to lay our own lines and get our own stuff out and do everything. No, they pull up and they just plug up all the lines we got laid out, right? We're trying to comply with all this. You got to think about that high rise, Nick, or these big box buildings or everything. You got to think about those just like you've already laid your lines out. If somebody said, hey, I can get the smartest people on the planet that deal with fire protection to put every hose you need out before you get to every fire you go to, how about you guys use that? No, those damn people know nothing. Yeah. No, we got to stop that, right? We got to think that says, hey, when we pull up here, they've already put hoses in the building for us. Well, now we're going to go get our own, and we're going to do this to say, all right, now we're bringing the manual portion. Well, support the built-in and then deploy the manual.
Yeah, it's almost like, okay, the fire's being addressed, so we can go to the roof and cut a hole now, and then the ones that go inside can go inside with ropes and do searches that are going to be completely pointless until they run out of air. It's almost like because the building has its own protection, we abandon it.
That's what breaks my heart the most is to hear, and we went to one of these sites after one of these big fires. The local fire department meets us there, and they say, see, I do not trust these systems, and that's why we're just going to pull up here and turn it off. And I'm like, did you see anything in the news? Did you get anything on your little phone that says do not do that? They invested a lot of money in this thing to help you and your community. And so do not mess that first part of the system up. You're here to come and help that. And that's another good point you bring up with cut a hole in the roof. We have tons of debate in the codes and standards arena. So when we put all of our codes and standards people in a room, thousands of them, and say, okay, guys and gals, help us decide, should we put in a vent fan system or should we not? How does this interact with everything else that's got going on in the building? And there's a great debate going on that says, yes, put a vent in the top and an air intake in the bottom. And no, do not do that. Yes, do that. Don't do that. Well, and then we show up as the fire department and say, we're going to make our own since y'all can't decide. So that conversation has to be holistic. And that's where, as long as I've been in this profession, my whole thing was, and thank God I worked in systems that the parts wasn't divided. Training, prevention, operations, we all lived in the same houses and worked together and did that. But where you have that separated, we got to bring it together. Everybody has to talk to one another to say, how does this work? Like you've heard, they're beating up the fire department on some of these recent fires. And we got to stop beating ourselves up when the people that are doing the beating have no idea, right? They were just handed a club. So you heard in some of the radio traffic that said, hey, open the doors. Well, there was no doors to open, right? So just because one person on the fire ground says, hey, open the door, doesn't mean that function happens, right? There's trucks in every one of those bays. So there's no way to open. The doors are already open to the backs of those trucks and they're sealed, right? They're tight so they can get that. But that's a whole debate within our system. How do we get the smoke out of the building? And that's where my defense to those men and women doing a great job on that fire was, none of us have ever been in, and I've been to tons of sprinkler building fires myself as a firefighter, but those were mostly standard response sprinklers. They were not flowing 2,000 gallons of water a minute down on my head that I didn't even know that I could see through an infrared camera or not. So the fire department, you get that deep in a building, you have that massive amount of water flowing. How do we get the smoke? How do we deal with it? Well, you're going to just have to wait. You're going to have to be patient until you can assure that that fire is in the area that sprinkler was designed to. And again, stay away from the racks. Don't get in the middle of it. Corridor your way into the building and corridor your way out so we don't lose any men and women in this process.
I was recently at a large multinational agricultural conglomerate that happens to have a headquarters building in my city, and they have a fire pump in there, and the safety director was there, and we started talking about the fire pump and when we turn it off, and he said, don't turn it off. He said, just let it run. We're going to be here. He goes, one of three of us are going to be here eventually. If you've got an active fire, just let it go. And I found another thing interesting on this walkthrough I did with our fire marshal was in all the mechanical rooms, they had 2-hour ratings stenciled on all of the gypsum board in all those rooms. And that's to keep us from making holes in them. I said, well, I've never seen this before where we're being told this is 2-hour rating. And it's like, yeah. And we did that so you guys wouldn't make holes in it if we had a fire in this room, because it's going to hold between the sprinkler system, and they've got a top-notch fire suppression system in this building. And the way it was constructed, their system is designed to put the fire out, and they don't want us going in there and messing that up. How often are you seeing that when you're talking to safety directors and these companies that have invested billions of dollars in fire suppression systems throughout their buildings, and then we're going in and it's kind of messing things up?
And nobody wants us to go in and mess things up, right? And nobody, as Chief Brunacini used to say, nobody woke up this morning and said, hey, let me go burn down somebody's building. We're in the fire department and we're there to protect. Well, the owner of the property had the first responsibility to protect their own assets. And then we're supposed to come and support that. And that's a good point you make. The fire pump, it's like, let it run. That's what it's designed to do. You wouldn't want somebody coming up on the fire ground and being like, well, I don't like that brand of pumper. Let me shut it down. No, you would never turn off a supply to a firefighter in a building. Well, that's what you're doing. You're turning the water supply off to the firefighters that are working in the building. no matter how, because you could have firefighters tied onto the standpipes that are in those buildings, right? That system is pumping that. And so that's where we have to make a change in mentality that says, number one, we need to know more about it, because that's the future. We didn't deal with this in our careers because, hell, there wasn't that many buildings that were sprinklered, right? That's happened since the 80s. But now it's like, all right, hey, wow, the engine company, I went to 3 sprinklered fires last week. Oh, yeah, because 80% of that part of town's protected with fire sprinklers. So I should probably learn how they function, why they're there, what my role is with them. And again, it's partners in progress. We got to get to the point where we all say, hey, we're in this together. We want to protect the people in the building. We want to protect the property of the building. That protects our community. And thus, that's what our role is. That's why they call us firefighters.
Shane, what are some of the tools out there if there's training officers and chiefs listening and they want to get more information? Because it's so intimidating. You walk into a fire control room with all the risers and we've got malls, we've got large buildings, and I even walk in and it's like, wow, there's a lot that can go wrong and there's a lot that can go right in here. How do we educate our people better to know how these systems run and how to operate with them?
Certainly reach out to us at NFSA. NFSA.org is the place to go. We have people in our public fire protection division that are former firefighters. Some of us still go to fires, but we have a whole division and group that does that in our learning, development, and training group. So we have 2 valve trailers across the country. We're building 2 more as we speak. You also have across the country, many of you all, the State Fire Marshal, State Training Academy has labs. Again, I'm sitting at Eastern Kentucky University now. They have $1 million lab facility at this university that's at the disposal of anybody who can get in reach of it. So, and you have a lot of those. The Tennessee Fire and Codes Academy, there's one in Delaware. You all have one out in Arizona. There's many, many places where you can go get intimate with these systems. And so reach out to us anytime you have questions. We have engineers, we have training specialists, we have codes and standards specialists to be able to help with that. And that's what we're here for. Our mission is to save lives and property from fire through the widespread acceptance of the fire sprinkler concept. So our whole mission in life is to make sure everybody understands the value, the function, the reliability, and those things on these systems, and 2, how they function in the greater community.
Well, it would appear that Walmart's already bought into it, being that they save their building once a month.
Yes, there's a lot of places that definitely know that this works. However, when we burn some of these facilities down because we have hampered the system, or they have in many cases, people want to immediately blame the fire department, but it could have been a facility person as well. So don't place blame. Let's just learn. And unfortunately, we're at the cutting edge. This thing's going faster than we are. And back to your question, John, with that, it's like, where do we go? What do we do? Well, there's great minds that are working now to say, we've never been 600 feet deep inside of a building that we're not sure whether the racks are going to hold up or they're not going to hold up. And how do I get a backhoe, a track hoe, a dump truck or something to get in there to get this collapse zone cleared out so we can do salvage and overhaul? And that's where I would also add that says we have to think about these things and act more like it's a hazmat incident that says, let's pull up and let's see how things are going. Let's do a really good size up on this baby. Let's see how the system's performing. And let's see what's going on before we go and take, from my experience on sprinklered fires in big buildings and then looking at these fires over the last 5 years, is to say, if you can go isolate that area, you're going to have 3 alarms, 4 alarms. You're going to have a lot of people to get in there and get salvage and overhaul performed on this building. So you got to go line up the firefighters. You got to line up the air trailers. You've got to do those things that says, I'm going to have a lot of people and a lot of air to go make this thing work.
It's almost more of a TRT call than a hazmat call because of all the collapse and everything else. Kind of the same thing happened, and I think it to the whole industry. It wasn't until UL started doing their test of modern construction methods for residential, single-family residential, that they're finding out that unfinished basements, fires in those will outperform the smoke detector getting the family out safely. So, and then that was kind of a big deal 10, 15 years ago in the service. It's like, well, Jesus Christ. And then you got firefighters falling through the first floor into the basement and all the rest of it. It almost feels like this is the same way. Like, okay, sprinkler systems have evolved past us 25 years now. And what do we do? And you said it, you can't go 600 feet inside an IDLH. We're not equipped to do that. The Navy SEALs wouldn't. No, if we don't have enough air to finish our mission, we don't go on the mission. So I don't think we have that level of, supervision in our service, let's say, or standards, whatever it is.
We've been talking for a while though about, you got to create a fire attack team before you do, any type of real work there, which, I mean, that's what, Shane was saying, but that initial size up, what's really going on, talk to the responsible party there that probably has quite a bit of information of what's happening, support the fire department, connection, and then getting people to realize that if that sprinkler system's flowing 500, 1,000, 2,000 gallons a minute, you stretching one more line in there as soon as you pull up isn't going to make a difference. So that kind of is leading me to how much water generally, Shane, do you think is getting applied at like a Walmart fire? It seems like the sprinkler system controls it most of the time. So we've had some experience with San Antonio Fire Department. They shared that fire that they had there, that it was interesting. They got called to a working fire. They didn't get called to a sprinkler activation because the security saw the fire before the sprinkler activated. And in that report, it looks like they flowed less than 500 gallons a minute from a hand line, that the sprinkler pretty much controlled the whole thing.
Yeah, John, in all these big boxes, that first sprinkler activating is going to flow more than 100 gallons a minute if that thing's been built since the 2000s, right? So that thing's going to flow a lot of water. When you get some of those big sprinklers, those ESFR sprinklers, they'll flow 200 gallons a minute plus out of one device. So when that fire pump kicks on at 150 to 170 PSI, it's flowing a lot of water. And, to what Nick said, we got to change that thinking. It's not only the construction of the building, but the contents. The other piece we've done, we conducted this test at UL. They built houses inside their lab. We had never done before that a test that says, how does the energy code affect the building? So we want to attack the construction, the materials used in construction. And it's like, no, it's this whole package, right? We're not dealing with one component. We're dealing with all the components. And where we were burning today, we use the same couch, the same love seat, the same thing. It's all brand new. We buy it brand new. That one couch we know will kill everything in a 3,200 square foot house in 4 minutes and 16 seconds. We've done it. We can do it again and again and again and again. And if you would have told me, and Chief Brunacini said it sitting on the front bumper of a pumper in Spartanburg, South Carolina. He said, Shane, we're finally listening to the fire. I'm like, right. And that fire, we know how it performs. We know what we know what an open top container is going to do in a building. We know what a cardboard box versus a plastic box. We have all this information. It's like, how do we get it to the men and women that are off of Big Red? That's our biggest challenge in the American Fire Service today, is to say, how do we give you what we know? And then how do you apply it when you step off in the street? That's our biggest challenge.
A lot of the things that we've been saying for the last 5 or 6 years about all of the big box deployment and slow down, and you need to understand the system, and going to the riser room and supporting the system. And
we need that bad. And one of the things too, Factory Mutual has a program, and they have since I was a young firefighter, and it's called Fighting Fire in Sprinklered Buildings. However, one thing and when I hired into this job I'm in now with the National Fire Sprinkler Association, Some of our people said, we're not in the business of telling fire departments what to do. I'm in the business of telling you what I think. You can do what all fire departments in America will do. You can do whatever the hell you want, right? And I would never get in between you and doing what you want. But I also feel we've got to go tell this story. The problem we have, Factory Mutual's had that program. They've evolved. You can go to their training as part of that program now, and I've done it in the last 5 years. You can go to their facility in Georgia and look at it, and you can put your hands on it, and you can watch water flow. But in 1001 in our JPR there, you got a firefighter standing out there with a wooden wedge, right? It's like a form of hazing more than it is training, right? Because I just told one of our groups the other day, I said they were talking about that and how cool that was. And they got their own mobile training trailer. A firefighter can go out there and stick a wooden wedge in a sprinkler head. And I'm like, well, take that sprinkler you've got that you do that with now and go add one of these honking ESFR sprinklers that's flowing 270 gallons of water a minute when that when the fire pump kicks on. I'm like, give them that wood wedge then and say, hey, go stick this in that. Well, if they even try it, they're going to come back and want to stick it in something you have. Back to your fighting fire and sprinkler buildings. And the reason nobody has the program developed yet is, and this came from me being out in Arizona with you guys. I was out there for a baggers meeting, and they had a fire in an area, Hampton Inn, started with an e-cigarette. So an e-cigarette on a bed, lithium batteries. We can talk about those. You guys in Arizona too have a long history with batteries. I understand there's still an incident going on out there now. If you go and take that room in a Hampton Inn that's like 200 square feet or whatever the size of the room is, and then you let the sprinkler flow for 2 hours, it's like you've ruined a lot of shit you shouldn't ruin, right? Just go shut it off. I got this fire, right? It's a fire in the mattress. I got the mattress. I'm going to put it in my pocket and get it the hell out of the building. When you pull up to a big box, you do not have those same conditions. And you are trying to keep the Hampton Inn with people sleeping in it, and you're trying to get this distribution center distributing products. In Mrs. Smith's house, you're trying to get her back in her house. If we took that mentality more, we would have a lot better outcomes with what our purpose in life is.
That comes back to the whole thing of that's been around for 40 years of we get there and we evaluate the critical factors, and that leads us to what our incident action plan is, what we can actually do. Between a kitchen fire and the whole house is on fire, the difference between the second floor is on fire or the basement's on fire, or your example, the difference between a room at the Hampton Inn that's 300 square feet's on fire, or I got a 100,000 square foot Walmart and the section where toilet paper's at, is on fire. I mean, totally different animal.
I think, and to Josh's point with the critical factors, is part of that is designed where we get to the scene and we don't make it worse. That's how we should begin our response. Is the fire department's going to show up, and from the moment we get to the scene, we're going to start making it better. And sometimes, like in the case of what we're talking about here, that means don't screw with the system. Just support the system, let it do what it's going to do. And you're not going to, it's like we're going to give it 3 or 4 of our work cycles before we really start committing to interior positions, and most of it's going to be the size up in the front end is what it sounds like is the best action to take at these things. One of the questions I have is like, when you go back to Redlands at the Amazon distribution center, when these things are burning down, is this typically because somebody has turned the valves off ahead of us? Because you're hearing that more and more now, is that they got there and like it was flowing in one place but not in the other. And
we don't have any case in these fires, Nick, where we found that somebody said, hey, we're going to go intentionally do something to turn this off beforehand. There was a fire in the state of New York that involved a very large facility that the street valve was turned off. And so, but then they got that open, functional, and again, it made a difference in the overall outcome. Still burned way more than it should have, but that's the case. The fire, like you're talking about with the Amazon, that we believe was an outside in, perhaps, fire.
Oh, okay. So it got up in the concealed spaces quickly.
And so if you get above that sprinkler, it's not functional, right? It's designed to put water down. In those cases too, you have arson to play, right? In some of these big box fires, there's arson fires involved. That's a whole nother scenario. And that's a case where we've had a recent fire that was arson. And the question is did they intentionally go turn the valves off? Because there's no video that we've been able to watch from public land anyway that says, oh, I see water flowing in there. Because we can tell from a building that says, hey, is this thing getting water flowing on it or is it not? Right? Do I got cold, lazy smoke or is it pushing? Well, you can generally tell when there's water flow, especially from those big systems, right? But
do they still have the gongs? Did I have the water gongs?
Most of those are electronic, but yes, they do have to have an audible signal to the exterior. So like in some of these, you also have, it's called a VESDA system. That's a trademark piece, but it's very early warning smoke detection, right? This pipe and tube is in here sniffing for things. So you can have infrared, you can have sensors, you can have smoke detection. You can have all these other components that go with the fire protection features of these buildings that control fans and conveyors and other parts of the processes that we as firefighters need to understand too. It's not like, again, pulling up to a single family dwelling and saying, somebody go pull the meter. No, I need all this stuff to keep working. That's why all that stuff is in a building. Typically, as John said earlier, it's got a 2-hour rating or it's totally detached from the building itself, right? It's a standalone building. And that's one of the things that I'm going to be advocating is we need, if you go to a high-rise building in any downtown city, somewhere there's a fire command center, right? We make it in the code and the standard to say, you got to have this separate area. We're going to go in here. We're going to look at it. We're going to see what's up. That's where we're going to command our operations from. Well, we need that on these buildings. The men and women that went on these fires come in and said, hey, this fire pump's working. Check, perfect. Good. Tell us that. What pressure is it operating at? And that's where, too, we're even recommending in some of these cases that says, why don't we have a response from the contractor world? If we don't understand that, I've been a firefighter for a long time and represent the sprinkler industry now. That stuff's way over my head. I need to call in those experts that are project managers, fire protection engineers, and those people that do these systems and say, hey, help me understand what this thing's telling me. And even in some of these last fires, I'm like, our people that are in the business of putting those systems in say, Shane, the system's working fine. It's holding pressure. That indicates that, hey, not all of these sprinklers have operated. Versus like the fire out in California that says, hey, 6 of these systems operated within a few minutes. Well, that's bad. That means you either have a flash fire, something has gone wrong that somebody smarter than me could say, Shane, this is bad. Okay. Or Shane, this is good. Just let's have some coffee. Let's assemble the troops out on the pad, and then let's reassess.
Well, I don't think anybody's ever identified or described a standard operation in a modern, large sprinklered building where you're going to say, no, this is going to take you 4 days to get to the point that you're driving tractors in to haul this shit out of here. Because if that became common knowledge, it's like, well, okay, then we're going to just show up and put picnic tables and wait for all these other people to get here. And that sounds like that's what we should be doing because that's what they designed the fire protection system to do.
And you're exactly right. We do that in hazmat some, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. If we go down to the local chemical plant that we have no idea how that stuff's all making together. We're like, hey, that's the owner's problem.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. We're not. And they have contractors that says, hey, we're going to come in and clean this up. Right? You wreck a big truck on the interstate and spill a bunch of bad shit down the middle of the road. We're going to try to keep it to that area, right? And then we're going to call in a lot of experts to say, hey, you need to come deal with this shit.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't know that we're not headed this same way.
It's so specialized, you should be.
Yeah. It's like, what am I going to do with 50 feet of racks in this thing that have collapsed or not collapsed, or now it's all wet? And then 2, we're getting now these buildings. The last one I walked into a couple of weeks ago, it was 80 feet to the deck of that building, to the roof deck. I'm like, there is no fire department in America that is prepared to deal with a 600-foot wide, 80 feet tall, I don't even know how long building that's got tons of product in it. We just have no idea what we're going to do with this.
When they have no idea what the roof deck's made out of. It could be a piece of 1/64 inch D deck up there that they're screwing around on. It's the first time they've ever been up there and operated on it.
It's safe to say in that case, Nick, we do not want to be up there.
No, we don't. In fact, it's a violation of every goddamn regulation that's ever put in place on the construction industry.
And two, when you got those 80-foot wall that's a tilt-up slab of concrete, how close do you park the truck? Let me just get it at the four corners of the building, right? It's like, good. You could spray enough to maybe put in a single-family dwelling if you had it set on top of the building, but outside of that, you're not reaching nothing.
Yeah, it's a large tactical problem.
And big box is a large tactical problem. That's well said.
We appreciate you being with us today, and man, we'd love to have you back on because I think there's so much knowledge that you have, and I think being able to connect our emergency response to the work that you're now doing with the National Fire Sprinkler Association is so important for us to better understand the systems and what we should do when we arrive on these scenes. And I think we really need to start tapping into you a little bit more here on B-Shifter so we can get that information to our folks.
Yeah, I love working with you guys, love the fire service, and definitely there's such a need that you guys are driving that says we have to get this information to the incident commander.
Before we go, there's one thing we like to do at the end of each B-Shifter is we have a deck of cards here from Alan Brunacini's Timeless Tactical Truths. And we like to pick one out and just at random talk about it just for a minute or so. And we'd like you to weigh in on this one today. So as we shuffle the deck and pull one out, we've got the 8 of diamonds. And this one from Bruno is the first 5 minutes can be worth the next 5 hours. Well, I think we've talked a lot about the first 5 minutes today, right, Shane?
The first 5 minutes is going to be key to the 5 hours, could be 5 days, right? That's when, if our goal was to get that building back in service in 5 days, wouldn't that be a great goal for everybody? So those timeless tactical truths are so true and appropriate. And the incident commander is absolute key to starting the situation correctly. And then 2, to make sure if somebody called out a radio traffic that said, go do X, we need the incident commander just to pause long enough to say, is that correct? Especially if it's dealing with the fire protection systems or any construction components of that building. If they just pause for that time to say, all right, what's the outcome of that decision going to be? And it's different in these buildings. And so the first 5 minutes is going to be key to I would say you could add the first 5 minutes is going to determine the next 5 hours, the next 5 days, the next 5 months, or the next 5 years. Because here's how those fires are going to go. We know them, they happen, they go out, then everybody shuts down. The lawyers all go get involved. It goes quiet. Years from now, they'll write checks. And then we'll all sign an agreement that says, keep your mouth shut. And we're out here going, what do we learn about that? I don't know. All we can do is go speculate. We've done a lot of that here. And unfortunately, that's the world we live in now. But what I'd love to do is get a bunch of people together that says we've got to go start tackling these buildings. So, and that's the timeless tactical truths we need to identify for our profession.
We'd like to thank Shane Ray for joining us today on B-Shifter. If you'd like to contact Shane, we have left his email in our show notes, along with our emails too. If you like this episode, please share it with your friends and colleagues and subscribe. Until next time, thanks so much for listening to B-Shifter. Please be safe.